Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the book of Galatians, and we're in chapter 2. And Paul's continuing a long rehearsal of his history in the church up to that point. And again, he's giving us lots of information that we didn't have before. Now, we know from the book of Acts, chapter 11, that when the church at Antioch sprung up, and it did. It was not a planted church. It was a church that organically grew from Christians who found themselves in Antioch, very populous, very important city, one of the 3 or 4 most important cities in the Roman Empire. They found themselves there. They established a church which contained both Jews and Gentiles. And when we read in chapter 13 about the men who were the leaders of that congregation ministering to it, including Paul and Barnabas, we have people raised in Rome, people raised in North Africa, and a former priest from Crete, and a former rabbi from Tarsus who was trained in Jerusalem. It is such a diverse group of people, and it reflected the church that they served. Barnabas is the man who was sent to that congregation by the apostles, the encouraging guy, son of consolation. That's the name that the elders gave to him, and he was exactly that person for this congregation. It's so important to know that the apostles didn't send a guy up there to make everybody conform. They sent someone up there to encourage and to lead and to cultivate the growth of the work that was vibrant. They didn't want to prune it at that moment at all, but they needed somebody to make sure it grew properly. And they sent Barnabas, and he did. And he celebrated what was happening there. And the apostles and the disciples were called Christians first there at Antioch, Acts 11, verse 26. And so when Barnabas gets that work established, the first thing he does is to make the 2-day journey to Tarsus to say, Saul, I need you to come work with me. And Saul was there for 14 years at least. He was there for a long time. And we forget how long of an apprenticeship he had at the feet of Barnabas as he had an apprenticeship at the feet of Gamaliel, and the 3 years he had at the feet of Jesus, how important that was to his formation, to be molded by this guy. Paul, such an intense personality, somebody who can say, what is wrong with you people, you foolish Galatians? I mean, that's that he has the capacity for that. And to spend 14 years with a guy like Barnabas, who is a positive and an encourager, was, I'm sure, so important for the Apostle Paul. Let's read these verses. We're going to read 1 through 10, and this is about his work at Antioch. After an interval of 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along. Now, this seems to be, and we're told about this trip in Acts 11, when they were told that by a prophet that there was going to be a famine in all the land. And the people in Antioch were worried about the saints at Jerusalem who had impoverished themselves to support the church when it was born. And so they took up a collection for the saints in Jerusalem. And Paul and Barnabas went and took it and delivered it. And we're told about that in Acts chapter 11. In fact, raising money for the poor saints in Jerusalem is something Paul will do for the rest of his career. He's raising money for them in 2 Corinthians, and he's delivering the money in Acts chapter 21 and 22 when he gets arrested. So this will be part of his life's work. After an interval of 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along also. And it was because of a revelation that I went up, and I submitted to them the gospel which I preach among the Gentiles. But I did so in private to those who were of reputation, for fear that I might be running or had run in vain. But not even Titus, who was with me, though he was a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. But it was because of the false brethren who had sneaked in to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ Jesus, in order to bring us into bondage. But we did not yield in subjection to them for even an hour, so that the truth of the gospel might remain with you. But those who were of high reputation, what they were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. Well, those who are of reputation contributed nothing to me, but on the contrary, seeing that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter with the gospel to the circumcised, for he who effectually worked for Peter in his apostleship to the circumcised, effectually worked in me also for the Gentiles. And recognizing the grace that had been given to me, James and Cephas and John, who were reputed to be pillars, gave to me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, that we might go to the Gentiles, and they to the circumcised. Only they ask us to remember the poor, the very thing I was also eager to do. So it was evidently a deal when they went to Jerusalem. And they took Titus with them. And I think they took Titus with them on purpose. He's a Roman citizen. He's a Greek, and he is not circumcised. And they take him for the purpose of having them there, and making sure he doesn't have to be circumcised, refusing to circumcise him, which he makes a big point of in this account. He talks about those who are reputed to be pillars. And it makes no difference to me what their reputation is. God shows no partiality. I'm just telling you, we went to the people that were recognized as influential when we went to Jerusalem. And he names three, Peter, James, and John. And he reported to them what they'd been doing, and they extended to him and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship. And they said, okay, you go to the Gentiles, and Peter and we'll minister to the Jews. We'll go to the Jews, but don't forget us. Don't forget the poor. The poor is them, the people who live in Jerusalem. They're the poor ones. Keep the money coming. In other words, they say. And he said, of course I'm going to do that. I'm eager to do that. I will always do that. And he always did. He was always raising money for the poor saints in Jerusalem who had impoverished themselves to support the local church. They'd sold all their stuff. Barnabas had sold his property to support the local church when the church was first established in Jerusalem. And he was eager to do that. But we get a sense of how tense it was to meet. That there was a bit of circling around. And there was a little bit of, proper respect, due homage that at least some of them expected from Barnabas and Saul, or at least Saul felt that way. And maybe Saul was the one who was made to feel that way because of his past. I don't know. But there's tension when he goes back to Jerusalem with the money. And yet that tension in no way contravenes the gospel, because he says this is what we're preaching, and they said that's the gospel, and we are all on the same page. And you go preach what you're going to preach to the Gentiles. You keep doing the good work that you're doing, and we'll work among the Jews here, and that involved Peter, James, and John. And just remember us, and that's what I was eager to do. And so we have that meeting, and then we have some more that he needs to tell us about that involves Peter and James, and we'll talk about that next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.